On the afternoon of April 30th, 1945, Adolf Hitler entered the private chamber of his bunker in Berlin. He was with his wife, Eva Braun, who he had married just the day before. The collapse of the Third Reich was now a formality, with the Russian forces advancing into the center of Berlin. Hitler had just found out that his ally Benito Mussolini had been hanged by Italian partisans. It was over. For Hitler and his fellow Nazis, surrender was simply unacceptable. There was only one option. In his private study, Hitler handed Braun a cyanide pill that he'd procured from his physician. He too had cyanide, and he was armed with a Walther PPK. Braun took her cyanide capsule, and Hitler shot himself in the head. Or did he? Almost immediately following the fall of Berlin and the subsequent defeat of the Nazi Empire, there was confusion surrounding Hitler's death. Although eyewitnesses attested to seeing Hitler and Braun's corpses, there have been widespread conspiracy theories about whether they actually died in Berlin, or somehow he made his escape. One theory is that he and Braun both made it out of Germany and found refuge in South America. There have been reports of Hitler living into his 70s in Argentina, Colombia, and other regions of South America. Some conspiracists claim that Hitler and Braun escaped from Germany in a submarine. They then lived secretly in Argentina, planning a Fourth Reich with other Nazi fugitives. As fanciful and unlikely as this sounds, at the time there was a genuine confusion concerning what actually happened. A lack of transparency from the Russians who found Hitler and Braun's bodies helped create the notion that the Führer might not have died after all. Soviet leader Joseph Stalin was keen to seize any possible advantage over Britain and the US, and he instructed his officers to report Hitler's death ambiguously. So what most likely happened on April 30th in that Berlin bunker? Did Hitler take the fittingly cowardly way out, or did he miraculously make it out of the country? Well, let's look at what we do know, and from there we can make up our own minds. The writing had been on the wall for Hitler, following the D-Day landing in France in June 1944, and from there the Allied forces pushed across the Western Front, culminating in the crushing defeat of Germany in the Battle of the Bulge. Over 100,000 German soldiers were killed, and an Allied victory was basically assured. Similarly, Hitler was also suffering massive losses to the east, with Russian forces advancing steadily and reclaiming former Soviet territories that Hitler had seized. By early 1945, Russia had taken control of Poland, East Prussia, Romania, and Hungary. They had control of the oil fields that German troops so desperately depended on, and they were taking prisoners by the thousands. As April rolled around, Hitler knew that it was only a matter of time before Berlin fell. The Nazi ideology was clear when it came to an unthinkable defeat: never surrender. Suicide was seen as the dignified and proper way to bring things to a conclusion. Surrender was regarded as a poor option for several reasons. Firstly, it was an ignoble way of ending a war. To give in to one's enemy was the ultimate humiliation and an admission of weakness. Suicide also denied the enemy the satisfaction of capture and whatever ensuing punishments they might have had in mind. Finally, the Germans saw suicide as the better option because they were fearful of what lay in store for them, particularly in Russian hands. Higher-ranking Nazi officials were no doubt unnerved by the grisly death of Mussolini. After being hanged in public, Mussolini's body was thrown into the gutter, where it was repeatedly kicked and spat on by enraged Italian patriots. Other Germans were also afraid that surrender would at best guarantee them a lifetime sentence in a Soviet labor camp. Rape, beatings, and being killed were other possible fates. By mid-April, over 500,000 Soviet troops had marched into Berlin. A mass bombing of the city began, with a key target being the Chancellery building under which Hitler's bunker lay. Eva Braun, at the time still Hitler's girlfriend, vowed that if he were to take his life, then she would join him. Inspired, Hitler married Braun on April 29th for what was to be the most short-lived marriage. It is from here that we can start to piece together the evidence that overwhelmingly points to Hitler's suicide. Eyewitness accounts are crucial. In 2005, a 93-year-old woman told of being Hitler's nurse. She confirmed that in the days leading up to his death, Hitler was in a state of extreme paranoia. He barely slept, mumbled to himself, and feared that the cyanide pills had been swapped for fakes. Just several days prior to his death, Hitler had presented medals to members of the Nazi Youth Party. One member remembers seeing Hitler's mental state disintegrate, as he learned that there was no resistance to the Soviet forces. The youth watched on as Hitler first flew into fits of rage, and then zombie-like trances, reflecting on the grim realities that lay ahead. Perhaps the best account of what took place comes from Hitler's private valet, Heinz Linge. Linge served under Hitler for 10 years and was with him around the clock in the bunker during the final desperate days. It was he who was the first to discover Hitler and Braun's bodies. In his memoirs, Linge recalls Hitler's fragile mental state leading up to April 30th. He remembers Hitler pulling him aside and telling him of his and Braun's plan for suicide. Linge went on to say that Hitler also gave him explicit orders for what to do following their suicides. He was to wrap up their bodies in blankets and take them up to the Chancellery Building garden and cremate them. According to Linge, Hitler spent a sleepless last night and then had a lunch with Braun and his staff on April 30th. In the mid-afternoon, Hitler announced that he and Braun were retiring to his study, where they would take their lives. Linge says Hitler then gave him permission to flee with whoever he could to the west and continue the fight. When Linge entered Hitler's study sometime after 3:30 on April 30th, he discovered the pair sitting upright on a couch. Hitler had a gunshot wound to the head and Braun was motionless, emitting the smell of burnt almonds, synonymous with cyanide. Another of Hitler's aides at the time was Otto Guensche. Before he died in 2003, he recalled Hitler specifically ordering him to cremate the bodies. After Linge discovered the corpses, Guensche said that he and other members of the staff carried their bodies up to the garden. He claims to have been the one to throw a burning rag on the petrol-drenched corpses of Hitler and Braun, setting them alight. It's hard to ignore the validity of these accounts. What's a little unclear is exactly what happened when the Russian forces stormed the bunker and took possession of what was left of Hitler's body. Soviet troops found his charred remains several days after his death on May 5th. There wasn't much. Only his jaw and, crucially, a section of his teeth remained. Meanwhile, Stalin went about conjuring up rumors that Hitler was believed to have escaped. He ordered his generals and staff to spread the rumor, hoping to confuse the Americans and the British. The common line was that Hitler had left Germany and was thought to be headed towards South America. And so began a bizarre series of reported sightings of Hitler that continued for many years after the war. British and American intelligence agencies were regularly contacted by people claiming to have spotted Hitler alive and well. The sightings ranged from the bizarre to the downright ridiculous. Someone claimed to have seen Hitler in Ireland, dressed as a woman. Another source spotted him in Egypt, now a practicing Muslim. Others reported seeing him on a train in New Orleans and in several restaurants around the world. Perhaps the conspiracies that held the strongest weight were those relating to sightings in Argentina. The South American nation had become a notorious hideaway for ex-Nazis. Many Argentinians had strong cultural and historical ties to Germany, and some political leaders were sympathetic to the Axis cause. Furthermore, many ex-Nazi criminals had stashed millions away, and were only too happy to share some of it, if it meant their safety was guaranteed. However, the cold, hard facts make it hard to believe the conspiracy. We already have first-hand accounts from Hitler's staff about his suicide and the discovery and removal of his body. And then there's the dental evidence. When the Soviet found Hitler's teeth, they immediately tried to locate his dentist. When they realized that he had already fled the city, they found the dentist's assistant, who took them to the Chancellery dentist's office. Inside, they found x-rays of Hitler's teeth, which seemed to match the teeth they had found. When the dental assistant saw the teeth, she immediately recognized them as Hitler's and identified them. It was easy because Hitler had notoriously poor teeth. In fact, when he died, he only had 5 of his original teeth remaining. The Soviets were satisfied, confirmed the death, and whisked Hitler's teeth back to Moscow for safekeeping, where they remained stashed for the next 70 or so years. The final confirmation came in 2017, when a team of French pathologists were allowed to examine the remnants of Hitler's teeth. After comparing the set in Moscow to his 1944 dental records, the French team was in no doubt that they were indeed Hitler's teeth. Case closed. We occasionally hope that a conspiracy theory may be true. For example, a rascally bank robber fakes his or her death and manages to escape to a new life in the tropics, Shawshank Redemption style. However, in the case of Hitler, it's reassuring to know that thanks to his terrible teeth, he is most definitely, fully, and emphatically dead.